And we'll wait until Laura, because she is giving the presentation first.
Right.
So we'll wait for,
Do I got time to go to the restroom?
Does she know that it's,
you can, yeah, because Laura has.
All right, I'll be right back.
she does know it's 7:05 and
I
7:30?
do hope.
Once you start the other stuff.
Well,
Yeah, you can do the other
somebody-
stuff and go back.
I mean, this one's,
well, it's kind
We'll wait till time after.
Can you turn it back on?
And then she gets to take
of,
it.
all right.
oh,
So we'll wait a couple minutes.
anything now?
Has she been here since they switched it to?
No. Are you on RG? Yep. All of those things. I don't know, but it worked 20 minutes ago. And you're on the RGB thing? No. We made a good effort.
Yes. Yes.
What happened? I didn't see, you had it work like this.
Yeah, it works. Come on here.
Yeah.
Everything was fine.
Oh,
I'm like,
I went to the parts and get it back.
I'm saying here.
I was responding.
Strange.
So every time I see you,
Really want
I did remind her of 7. Oh, speaking of the devil.
to read it, you'll.
I refer to, I've been,
You wanted to make an entrance. I understand. I can only imagine.
Oh, it was fun.
life was good.
Get one of these flags and go back 3 hours later.
No,
Village.
Hi,
Oh, good. How are you doing?
thank you.
You're welcome.
He's not here.
Not here?
You got Jerry's picture?
You should, let it the second time.
Sure. I don't know about the day, but follow along.
Email Jennifer to send me a copy.
Oh, you did? No, I did too, and I did not get it.
Well, that stinks, you're gonna be my shot for that.
Well, I did
And I
try
think
For
you're
you?
speaking tonight,
Why? You're not on
that's
the
gonna be a
list.
problem. Do you think we could shift this over just slightly?
This way?
Does it have to be on the end, or could it be more in the middle of the row? Because then it would be, it just need like 2 chairs over and it won't be in my frame.
Ready?
Back.
Okay. It is, I believe, 7:05, 7:04, and sorry we're beginning a little bit late, but I would like to call the September 27th Village of Webster regular meeting of the Board of Trustees to order. And if you would stand with me, please, Pat and Al, would you lead us in the pledge?
Absolutely. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. First order of business this evening, we are going to have Laura Landers from Creed Maxick give us a recap of the audit that took place this past summer, 2017-18.
Yeah,
So Laura?
okay,
the floor
Thank
is
you, Mayor.
yours.
As the mayor had said, we performed an audit of the village for the fiscal year ending May 31st, 2018. We, last week, reviewed these drafts with Chris and the mayor and answered some questions, and but these are the final copies. And I just briefly go over pages 3 and 4 of the financial statement itself, and then I'll go into the report to the board. Pages 3 and 4, as has been consistently, are what we call the government-wide statements. Governmental activities consists of the general fund and the capital projects fund, containing only projects related to the general fund. And then the business type activities are the sewer fund. And as you can see that at the end of the year, the net position, the sewer fund is a small deficit of a little over 39,000. That there is, these financial statements contain all of the capital assets, net of depreciation, and all of the liabilities of the village, which includes serial bonds, the village's share, proportionate share of the net pension liability, compensated absences, so includes all of the liabilities for the village. And the statement of activities, all the expenses, on page 4 there, the expenses also include not just your expenses that you have on your fund basis that you budget for, but also depreciation expense that relate to those capital assets, either in the governmental activities or in the business type activities. So these are the government-wide statements. They're required under generally accepted accounting principles, and just know that they incorporate everything related to the village. On page 5 starts what we call the fund basis statement. So these are the statements that you typically see when you're doing up your budgets. The general fund. General fund ended the year with fund balances of $1,809,329. Capital projects has a deficit fund balance of $28,478, but we would expect that because you borrowed money for a project, North Avenue connector, and that ban is $725,000. That's listed as a liability. So therefore, the expenditures that were incurred are showing up as expenditures, and that the liability, when that is permanently financed, this capital project would end up at 0 and would be closed out. So it's not unusual for you to have a deficit in that fund while that project is running. So, but I do want to draw your attention to the general fund and the fund balances, and we have classified, there's a interfund receivable payable between the general fund and the sewer fund. And this was part of our discussion when we reviewed the draft financial statements. It's $508,413, which is due from the sewer fund. We've classified that in the non-spendable category in the general fund, just because at this point there is no repayment plan or terms, and that is something that the board is going to have to look at. So right now, the unassigned fund balance in the general fund sits at $466,008. That's basically the fund balance that this board has to utilize for whatever purposes they choose to utilize it for. You also have restricted monies that are restricted for reserve purposes. The detail of that is on page 30 of the financial statements, if you want to make a note or if you want to turn to that. There is the detail of all of the fund balance numbers by the different classifications. Restricted for debt service, restricted for capital, and restricted for the North Avenue connector reserve. There's outstanding encumbrances at the end of the year. 41,798 was utilized to balance the 18-19 budget. And you can see under the non-spendable category is the amount that's due from the sewer fund. And then the last one in the governmental category is it's a non-major, is the Parks and Recreation that is sitting there with a restricted fund balance and cash of $129,913. The next page, page 6, is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. As you can see, the general fund, before transfers out, ended the year with a surplus of $188,724. $241,136 was transferred out to the capital projects fund for support of the projects that are going on in the capital project fund, namely the South Tower. So the net change in fund balance was a small deficit in the current year of $52,412. On page 8 begins the sewer fund, which is an enterprise fund, business type activity of the village. And these statements look just like you would see for a business type activity. Shows the assets, the non-current assets, which are your capital assets, net of accumulated depreciation. In there is also the deferred pension outflows and inflows, and as we had in our discussion, those are numbers that are provided by the state. It's really a function of what is the allocation of the pension liability that's provided to each municipality that participates in the employees' retirement system throughout New York State. So those numbers are going to fluctuate each year based on pretty much what the stock market does. So one of the things that we discussed and the mayor brought up was he said, you know, I saw that those numbers increased, but on the other hand, the actual liability that is allocated to the village actually decreased because the market did so well this last year, which was the measurement period for that is April 1st of 2017 to March 31st of 2018. So we all know the market did really well versus the prior year. Hence, the retirement system funding increased to a funded level of about 98%. So if you put that into context, after 2009, 2010, that period, the funding level of the employees' retirement system was about 84%. So it's certainly recovered itself and it is sitting there at close to 100% funded. Current liabilities, what's in there too is this due to other funds, which really makes that current liabilities significantly higher than what it would typically be. What's included in there too is the current portion of the serial bonds that'll be paid in the next year, and also a current portion of compensated absences. And then your long-term liabilities. Net investment in capital assets. That's your capital assets net of accumulated depreciation minus the related debt that goes along with those capital assets, which is your serial bonds. Post-employment benefit obligations, that's a long-term liability. This next year coming up, The village will have to implement Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement number 75, which means that the entire amount of whatever that liability is, which is, I'll tell you where you find it on this page here, for the other post-employment benefits, right now, that actuarially accrued liability is $3,983,161. Now, under Statement 45, that liability was allowed to be amortized and brought onto the financial statements over 30 years. With number 75, which will have to be implemented for the village's fiscal year ending May 31st, 19, that entire liability will come on to the financial statements. Now, doesn't affect the general fund. The liability that relates to those employees in the governmental, for governmental activities, will go on the government-wide statements. And the amount that relates to those employees who are employees of the enterprise fund, the sewer fund, that amount will go on the sewer fund, the enterprise fund statement. So no real impact as far as what you're budgeting for in the general fund. The village will continue to budget on which you have been doing, on a pay-as-you-go basis, which is basically you pay the bill. You pay the premiums, and that includes active and retirees. So that is something that you'll see, and we'll go over that. I'll point that out for next year, but that will happen. So the entire liability is on there. As far as the operations for the enterprise fund, the sewer fund, is on page 9. There was a operating loss in the current year of $132,059. There is non-operating revenues and expenses, which totaled $78,401. But you have to remember, in that operating loss is depreciation expense, and that's why I always like to look at the next statement, which is the cash flow statement, because that will tell you, here's the cash coming in, here's the cash going out. Now, what I have as a concern is looking at the cash flows from operating activities. That should be a positive number. That you should have cash that's being provided by your operating activities. You do have the special assessment, which is $115,543. So that does somewhat negate that $49,000. But what we really want to try to get to is that the operations themselves are generating, either a break even or a small surplus for the operating activities. Acquisition, construction of capital assets, that's basically an ongoing thing and will always be an ongoing for any enterprise fund, that you're always having to replace infrastructure, you're having to replace equipment, vehicles, those types of things. So that brings us down to the cash position at the end of the year. And that's a positive. The cash position actually increased by a little over 23,000 to an ending cash position of a little over 77,000 at the end of the year. The rest of the financial statements are the notes to the financial statements. We kind of went through the fund balance note. I talked a little bit about the pension note. There really isn't, because there was no new standards that were implemented in the current year, it's really not much changes related to the notes to the financial statements. Now, next year, we might spend a little bit of time because with the implementation of 75, there's going to be some significant changes to the note related to the other post-employment benefits. So we'll spend a little time going through that note. You're going to see that that note is going to look very similar to the pension note that is sitting in the notes right now. That's basically what that's moving toward, is that the other post-employment benefits are going to be treated more like the pensions are. You'll have deferred inflows and outflows possibly related to other post-employment benefits. So that note's going to be significantly longer, and we'll spend a little time going through that next year. Any questions regarding the financial statements before I go through the management report?
Quick question on page 10 there, that's Chris's fault, he gave me a copy of this. With the special assessment of the cash flows from non-capital financing, the special assessment, is that the unit charge per residential?
Yes,
Only those related to the residents that are on their tax bills.
on the tax
Because
bills.
then it's not an assessment if it's,
But it's a sewer rent, not an assessment. And technically, so it's from operating, not from, it's not a special assessment placed on a property for improvement that went in. It's a sewer rent charge or sewer fee for using the service. And if one house is, I'm thinking, if one house is a 3-family right next door to a single family, they're using the same pipes, doing everything the same, one pays a flat fee.
But it's a unit charge. It's not for usage.
The other ones are unit charges that's multiplied by actual use. So if it's metered use, if there's commercial property or 3-family property, we get what their water bill is and figure out the gallons that are used, and we multiply that by the unit charge. And the other ones are charged the same way, there's a unit charge as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's
Well,
split
that's actually
hairs or
all
if
of
it
it.
matters, but.
Yeah,
yes.
the amount, the 115 is the amount that's on the tax bill.
Right. But it's not really a tax or an assessment, it's charged through the tax bill, but it's a rent, right?
It's a language thing, Jason.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
Right.
exactly.
I mean,
Thank you for your comments.
Yes. And hence, that's why I said, yes, it's 49,000, but then look at the 115. It's different in that it's not, it's a charge, but it's not based on usage. The usage number is up under that, is 640,000, that's, well, you know, between receivables, they takes that into account. But that's a usage charge, that number that's on the tax bill doesn't relate to usage. Correct? I mean,
Well,
it's
it
not.
does, it's an estimated usage based on a 1 or 2-family home. So single-family homes are
But it,
1 unit charge, 2-family homes are 2 unit charges.
but it's not actually usage. It's a unit charge.
Unit charge.
It's a unit charge, but it's not, you may, the underlying calculation of how you get to that unit may be, well, we figure a single family is gonna use
60,000
Yeah,
gallons.
60,000 gallons.
we
But that's a
would bill
unit
one
charge,
family.
it's not based on actual usage.
I'm glad I don't have to do
Makes
that.
sense.
Thank you.
Believe me, Jake, I mean, I've seen it all. I've seen, you know, various ways of, you know, and it just happened that the, you know, the village, this is how they've decided to charge this, how decided to really structure how the sewer is going to collect revenues. Any other questions? As far as the management report, pages 1 and 2, our required communications to you as the governing board. We speak to there about, you know, if there has been any significant accounting policies adopted, not during the current year, we didn't identify any significant or unusual transactions. There are accounting estimates that are contained within these financial statements, and those are listed over on pages 3 and 4. I would say the most significant one is the depreciation, and that is for both the governmental activities and the business type activities. And also your post-employment benefits liability, because that's based on an actuarial valuation, which is an estimate. We had no audit adjustments. We had a couple, actually one uncorrected misstatement, minimal, and some reversal of some prior year entries, and those are on page 5. We had no difficulties encountered in performing the audit, and we did not have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies to
Very
report.
good. All right, Chris.
And also attached is our communication, which is the last thing to wrap up the audit, is our representation letter, which was signed by Chris. So that's in here for your review, so that you can see what communication occurred between our firm and the village.
No major hiccups, I know.
Yep.
Anyone else have anything they would like to ask or add? We had a good conversation over
We did.
this, so. Several concerns that will be brought up very shortly as we begin the budget process for next year. Okay. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
For your efforts and the efforts of your auditors.
Nice job.
Christina, for
Yes, you did good.
information
Yeah.
provided. Those good things.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Have a great evening. You too. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Not just that. Well, let's move on then to, there are no further comments at the moment. We'll have to discuss some of this workshop as we move forward. All right, let's open this up to public comment, questions from the village board. If anybody would like to address the board, you're welcome to come up and do so. State your name, address.
Good evening. My name's Kathy Williams. I live at 165 North Ave in the village. So first of all, I want to thank all of you. You work behind the scenes very hard, put up with a lot of crazy stuff. So thank you for the positions that you hold and the work that you do. The North Ave project is really great, and I really appreciate the new sidewalks and the lighting. However, I'm here to address the new lamps that you have on North Ave. Now, I don't think any of you live on North Ave, but there are several residences along the street, and the lighting is very, very harsh. I walked along Latham Park, and there are different
Yes.
glass panels in those lights that basically diffuse the light. We have direct light coming, and it is very harsh. And so I'm wondering if the board can look into that and do something about it to take care of it. The other suggestion I would make, and I know I talked to Will and I also talked to Carl about this, is the state still has their lights on, those great big pole lights.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
They don't have to take them down, just shut them off, and then they're not spending the money on the electricity, but we've got more ambient lighting, which was the reason that you put those lamps in there, to make it look more like a village. I have one other thing that I want to address along with that, because I live on North Ave, the wonderful Morgan Properties buildings that are across, because their lights are even worse. They're taller. If you go by at night, you find they shine right in the second floor bedrooms of these people. But I live across the street from there, and the lights are very, very harsh again. Now, I think back, I grew up at a time when I remember the old street lamps in Rochester, and they had a bit of a shade over the top. I don't know whether you can do that with these kind, but anything to sort of diffuse or obscure the light would be so appreciated, okay, before the snow flies, maybe. So that's what I wanted to share with the board, and thank you for allowing me to comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jake and I have had a conversation about that several times. RG&E.
Yes, RG&E, we're awaiting their response. We have scheduled the overhead removals. The ones, I believe your house is very close to the service road for 104, based on the number. So the ones right at 104 interchange are not coming out, the ones on the big steel poles, but all the ones on the wooden poles are coming down, the overhead lights, they call them, that really aren't. In regards to the lighting itself and the panels inside,
Yes.
the lights, they're angled array, they're called, and during installation, that was, we had to walk through at the project this morning. It was one of the points of discussion, as the project engineer brought that up. I'm not sure if you talked to her or one of your neighbors.
Monica.
Yep.
I talked to Monica about it.
Yeah, we discussed that this morning. I was actually gonna go down after the meeting and try to walk some of the areas to see. There should be a blank spot. There's a special type of fixture where they should be just shining light away from the houses. There's a blank spot on the back. If they were installed 90 degrees off, they might be in.
Here's the problem.
Not blocking
Problem though, Jake, that the idea for any kind of lamp is to shine light onto the ground, onto the area, to make it safe for everybody. But this is just beaming out everywhere. So even if a person is across the street in a house and you've got one of those lamps, even if you have one on the back side, you're still dealing with the front side. The bulbs in there are very, very bright. That's all I can tell you. If you were dealing with that at night, you'd understand that there's a good deal of light pollution right now.
And I think that's something we're gonna go through. First of all, make sure it was, it's as designed, that the lights are all facing the right way. That was one of the things that we spent a considerable amount of time on, walking. The original plan, I think, had 46 lights. It got knocked down to 33 lights because of concerns like that. And we just want to make sure, like I said, that they're not installed 90 degrees off. I appreciate what you're saying about it still shining on the other side. There's only a few options. They call it color temperature of how white the light is. We tried to pick one that was not as bright. There was ones, believe it or not, that could be quite a bit brighter. We tried to keep it somewhat softer, but a little bit more than like Lapham Park, because it's a busier area and a busier road, and we didn't have that reduction in the number of lights.
But what I noticed is the lenses on the lamps on North Ave are different from the ones on Latham Park. They are sort of like a cross-hatching on the glass, where ours are sort of pebbled just a little bit.
Yeah, it's almost like a bathroom window glass, yes.
Right,
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for, okay.
thank you.
Yeah, but definitely, if you want to send me an email, I can follow up with you, or I can stop in and get your address. I can knock on the door. So, but I'll try to let you know what we find out about that.
Let Carl know, he'll tell me.
All right, I'll let Carl know. I try to avoid.
You let Will know I'm bothering him all the time.
Yeah, definitely try to avoid Will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
I know that there has been a significant change. We live across the street from one of the new ones on Elm, and we're very lit up from across the street. Very lit up. See what we can do about that. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Everybody, Peter Alder, 59 Dunning. I'm coming to you tonight as my role as acting chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. Just a little brief explanation on that. Ed Atkinson is maybe out for a significant period of time. So I was acting, then I wasn't for a month, and now I guess I am again. So I've been asked to come and discuss with you a little bit about the Edna Struck Memorial Garden in the middle of Lapham Park. Those of you, all of you aware of what we're talking about? Right? Okay. So there's an island there, and then there's a stone on the island, and on that stone there's a plaque dedicated to Edna Struck, who for years was the person who actually took care of and led the effort to take care of the plantings and the maintenance of that particular area. So I can't remember the exact number of weeks ago, a few months ago, I think, I came to the board and tried to talk to you about some of the projects that the Historic Preservation Commission was engaging in, and you pretty much said, this is your project, good luck. So we've been looking at what we can do with that particular area. We called Bill Vendel, who is well known in the village because he supplies a lot of our plantings. I think our baskets, right? Jake, is that?
Yes,
Our
a lot
baskets.
of ground planting.
Yeah.
And the ground.
And the ground plane, okay. So we called Bill, we also called Michael Pickey, and they both were involved looking at the island. But Bill is the one who's providing us with what I want to talk to you about tonight, which is an estimate for replanting of the area and enhancement of the island. So if I could, I'd like to just pass this out. I have, you guys, am I sharing one? So this is the quote, and on the back of it, you guys mind sharing one? On the back of the sheet, you'll see, or one side of it, whichever you happen to look at, you'll see the actual diagram of what the plantings would look like. This is actually Bill's diagram. So we're talking about annuals and the various hydrangeas, grasses, perennials, and wagelias, and how that would actually kind of fit in. There'd have to be some adjustments of the existing. Did I say that wrong? I'm sorry. Anyway, there have to be some adjustments of the existing plantings to accommodate the actual design. So there would be some digging up and replantings. It would look significantly different, and it would be much enhanced from what's there now. So if you look at the diagram, it gives you an idea of about where that would be. If you look at the other side, this is the news about how much that would cost. So when you look at all the costs together, including labor and mulch, it's $1,250 for the project. So obviously, the Historic Preservation does not have that in its budget, though I'm not sure where our budget is now. Chris, do you know where?
$1,100.
We still have $1,100 in the account, okay. So the board has talked obviously about it, and we're obviously willing, this is a project you gave us, and we're obviously willing to we'd like to spend a significant amount of that, probably leave a little bit in there just in case there's something we would do, but that leaves us short, which is really why I wanted to come to you tonight to see if there's a way for us to fund the difference. There is a time issue here. It's not insurmountable, but the plantings would be best to be done now in the fall. And we talked to Bill extensively about that, about when it would be best to do it, and he said it would be best to do it now. So if I could ask you for your consideration of this, I'm not expecting you to do anything tonight, obviously, which I just wanted to make sure you had it. But if there's a possibility of putting on the agenda for perhaps the next meeting, and then thinking about how you'd like to do it, or if you'd like to do any adjustments to it. But obviously, we're looking to try to get this moving in October.
Well, time is of the essence.
Right.
You can't really wait much longer.
Right.
We finally got this from Bill the estimate.
And
That's what-
keep in mind,
Now,
there's also gonna be digging because there's gonna be
Yeah.
new topsoil put in.
Yeah.
So we're not just simply going to pull out and put in. There'll actually be a wholesale, we're gonna take out soil and put new soil in to try to make sure that the plants are well taken care of.
Yeah.
I did mention to you, the Michael Pickey, who's a
Yeah.
local aviary, came with us, and Mike's, I've known Mike for a while, he looked at the crabapple trees on the island and looked them over and said that in general, they're in pretty good health, but they do need a little trimming. He told us he would do the trimming for free. So, he does do things like that, so he's pretty trustworthy with regards to those type of activities. So we're doing the best we can to try to mitigate the cost on this. I hope you can appreciate that, but this one, it's tough to us to mitigate this particular cost because of the nature of the plantings themselves.
Yeah,
With the cost of the project, I believe, Jake, please correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know the rules better than I. Don't we need 3 quotes?
I know it sounds like you talked to Michael Pickey about it, Bill Wendell about
We
it.
didn't ask Mike to give us a quote, so if it's an issue of getting 3 quotes, we only have
Yeah,
one.
according to
Oh,
the,
no, yeah.
at least,
Procurement policy.
yeah, procurement
Yeah.
policy, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, over $400, a PO needs to be created,
Well,
which
you-
necessitates 3 quotes.
Yep, and under 3,000, I believe it is, it could be either,
All right.
verbal or written quotes and things like that.
Right.
Over 3, then there are written quotes only, and over 10's an RFP.
what, well,
Is this considered an official park?
It is.
I was gonna ask that.
I think it has a designation.
Yeah, it
does
does.
not?
well, that's why, yeah.
That's why
You know where I'm going with this?
It's where I'm, yeah,
Parks and Rec Fund?
yeah.
We got a
yeah.
few bucks in there.
Then this wouldn't even be a consideration, except for permissive referendum
Mhm.
for 1250.
Yeah.
I believe it's called Edna Struck Memorial Park. In reality, it's a medium.
Okay,
So,
I
I
agree,
don't believe it's
I
ever actually been designated as a park.
I think we call it a park, but I agree with Jake. I don't recall, at least the time that I've been around this board, which is a while, that's ever been designated in any board meeting as an actual.
We did talk about it.
Could be done through a resolution, don't get me wrong, it's not that difficult to designate it, but, it's just,
But that would make the difference, and then maybe we could do some parks and recs.
well, it makes a difference as long as the board thinks that we could expend
It's a
funds.
park you can't
Yeah.
walk on. So it's all gonna be planted with flowers and stuff. You don't
No,
want
no,
people-
no,
you
there's
don't want people
gonna be
walking
lots.
through it, do you?
Oh, yeah, there's gonna be room to walk around
Yeah.
in here.
Well,
yes.
I mean, I don't think we're encouraging, I don't think we necessarily would encourage people to
Yeah.
cross the road to walk in the median, but
Right.
we have talked about that, Don, because originally one of the concepts was, what if we put a bench there? But
Yeah,
again,
you said-
we're talking a roadway where it's a split roadway with a car going on both sides. I don't know that, that gets into some other issues that,
Well, there is an assumption that people would look at it because the plaquage there, you have to get close enough to read the
oh,
plaque.
that's true too.
Nobody knows it's there.
It is, right now it's
It's all
hard,
covered.
right now it's
Right
pretty
now.
hard because the
Yeah,
flag, right now the
yeah,
stone
no.
is actually covered, which we want to rectify as well, and you hit on one of the points, but in the future, the stone would actually have more prominence, would not, hopefully wouldn't get covered up by flowers. So flowers look nice, but you can't see the stone, so.
I think it would be a lot easier to get 3 quotes, call some landscaper, get 3 quotes, and hold a public hearing and permissive referendum to spend. It would almost cost you as much in the advertising for the public hearing as you're gonna spend on the flowers, if you try to take this out of Parks and Rec. Aren't they like $600 to put an ad in for a legal
No,
notice
it's
or-
not quite that bad, but.
No.
Well, here's the thing though, your point's good. We could easily get the other 2, all we have to do is get a verbal quote, which it sounds like we can do. We can easily get 2 other verbal quotes. So
Yeah.
let's not, but that's not an issue.
The preference is for the quotes to be in writing.
Well, we'll try to get
Whether
it
they email them to you or mail them to you,
fine.
so we can attach it right to the PO.
So, let me ask you this from a mechanical standpoint. Since we do have a certain time issue going on here, assuming the board's all in favor of this, is there a way to, how do you submit those? Honestly, I wasn't involved in this part. How do you submit those quotes to the village board?
We've got, I'm sorry, at least as far as the PO process, we have a purchase order, there's a spot on a 2-page purchase order with a spot to record quotes received, and if you have emails and stuff, we'll just staple them all together when we do the PO. I was trying to
Okay.
find the map, and I missed a little bit of the discussion on the funding for it. There was some historic preservation
There's $1,100 in that account.
So if we were to say use 900, leave 200 left for any expenses we might have.
What's the labor line, 565, what's that?
That would be Bill's actual labor, doing the plantings and some of the digging,
A lot of it, yeah.
so,
She's got a lot to clean up.
And that's him
I think.
only, okay. As an owner-operator, it's different requirements. If it's an employee, then there's prevailing wage requirements as well.
Okay.
So there's some different things, so.
What about the village?
I don't know.
Save some money there.
What do you mean about the village
I don't think
doing
it's save money.
it? What are they going to do?
Plant the flowers. Plant the plants.
Do a fine job of
Well, we
just
think we
mowing.
talked about excavating some of the stuff out. It says, I'm sure excavating movement needs some soil.
Right, I mean, there is,
Watch these
thank
guys.
you. If I could just point out the paragraph, it does say that the village would agree to help with the excavating to remove some of the old soil. So there is an expectation the village would be involved in some of the excavation here. So I don't know what labor, how we would, I'm not saying we couldn't save on labor, I'm just not sure where that would come from. I guess I have to defer to Jake and Will and the DPW guys on that, so.
Well, I'd say we certainly could, but we also have to act very, very quickly because there's a leaf season coming up pretty soon that is going to keep
Exactly.
everybody tied up pretty good, so.
You plan on planting this year?
He strongly urged us to plant in the fall.
Well, yeah, you should.
That's a great time.
So,
All right.
if you could give it some consideration, in the meantime, I will look at getting the other 2 verbal quotes, and then maybe we can meet back at the next village board meeting, is that possible?
Maybe even, I think, well, we can't make a decision at a workshop, right, if we don't.
Well, if he had it by Tuesday, we would consider it.
Well, that's what I would.
All right, so how about-
Because the faster we can,
So do you mind if we use that timetable as sort of a thought process? I'll try to get the 2
Yeah.
quotes for Tuesday, and then at least we can look at that.
yeah,
Okay,
that would be good.
all right, sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, because there's three of the ladies that we sat down to take care of it. And sure that we put things out there.
Yeah.
So you'll get your 4 seasons.
Yeah. We have to replace the curbs.
Anyone else? Oh, excuse me.
Rick Walder, Webster Citizens Action League. As you know, we've been distributing literature for a long time, and with the project over on Phillips Road, we have been asked about trees. There's some residents have asked us about how many trees are coming down, and I don't know if the village does have a large tree written in the code where certain size trees can't be removed or have to be replaced or what. So we would like a little clarification, if you have it tonight or maybe sometime in the future, about exactly how many trees are coming down for the housing project that's going to be going in on Phillips Road.
Would that be part of the original plan that was submitted?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
planning board thing and little things.
Is there a large tree code, or which some towns do have in the village?
No,
of Webster?
a lot of the trees, there's only a handful of trees in there that would meet the large tree code. A lot of them are scrub trees because they couldn't grow based on the soil type and the amount of water that's there. So,
Well, some of the residents were concerned, I know, on Barrett Drive with the project that went in down there just a few years ago. They were going to leave a bunch of trees along between that and the post office, and there, I think there's one. When the contractor came in, they just clear cut. And residents in that area, like I say, we have been asked.
yeah, I'm trying to remember,
that was talk, I was at that planning meeting, and they did say they were gonna save several of the trees along between them and the post office, but the contractor went just clear cut, basically. So, and I have another question for myself. I've been driving up and down South Avenue, and I noticed they're doing a lot of work on the large tower that still remains. Has anybody got any idea what the county's doing? I know yesterday I drove by, there was a big hole in the side of the center pipe, and today it looks like they fitted a new cap or something over it. Is there anybody that can explain just what's going on?
I can answer that. They were setting up for the scaffolding, and the particular type of scaffolding they use requires some of the modifications they made to the tower itself, so it's a temporary modification. So if you see like at the base of the one tower that's there, they have these welded rectangles there for two reasons. One is for the way I liken it and the way they said, yeah, this is what it is you know, those window washing scaffolding kind of things, that's what they're gonna be using. But also, they're gonna have a tarp around the whole thing.
So
And so they have to tarp it in.
So they're preparing to paint it? Is
Yes,
that-
that's correct.
Okay, and the large hole in the center pipe in the middle, not the light.
Where they took out the,
I don't know what they took out, there was a large hole in there.
Yeah,
And
it's-
to me, it's got some
that-
sort of a weird looking cap over it.
yeah, it had, that's where it originally had a man door, if you wanna call it that.
A hatch.
Yeah, a hatch where we used to crawl in there and do some work once
So
in a
they're
while.
replacing the hatches that are.
Well, that or, I don't know if they're replacing the hatch, but again, in preparing the paint, they've got to scrape down all of the old paint and any rust spots and things like that. So,
Okay, I just wondered if we do, although we don't have the use of it, we still own it. So I just thought it'd be nice to know what's going on.
Yeah, they're refinishing it inside.
Inside.
Yeah, so they're, you know, they need access to the inside, and I'm sure there's something.
So that maybe they wanted a bigger access door than the one
Well,
that.
that
so they
or
could move equipment in.
when they're doing the painting on the inside, it has to be maintained at a certain temperature. So that also might be used as a way to get heat in there as well.
Thank you.
Got a question as far as the color of the water tower. Is it gonna look like the one in Seabreeze?
I have no idea what color.
Seneca Road, it looks at the end of Seneca, right at the expressway there. There's a water tower and it's really ugly.
There's a
To be
Seabreeze
more-
had its own water.
I doubt it, because that's the Seabreeze Water District, it's not the Monroe County Water Authority.
Thank you.
That's
That's a
not one
good
of, that's
answer.
not one of, that's not one of the county's water towers.
They're pretty
Because
bland, actually.
does our village
So we
code,
do have.
color palette have something to do with it?
Mauve, they're gonna paint it mauve. Well, I don't even know.
So like brown or something,
Wow, that wow.
pastel.
There was a mock-up or a drawing of it, I believe it was sent around or forwarded on, that showed the new tank width, and they're adding Village Webster to the tank. You know, put it back on once it's painted on two sides.
Yeah, good.
And there, you know, the Monroe County Water Authority logo, and, yeah, and Jake was here.
Yes,
I'm thinking it's Monroe County blue then,
probably.
Yeah, that's fine.
pastel.
What we probably should consider too is the look at the buildings at the base, and they try to maybe make them somewhat the same if possible. I don't know who has jurisdiction over those, whether it's the individual companies or whether we do.
Oh,
It's nice
so-
to have all of that, kind of the same look. Right. Yeah, it'll be, you do have Village of Webster on there twice. Okay, well then, thank you. I'll close the public comment portion of the meeting. If there is no one else to address the board, then we will move to regular board business. And the first is a resolution to approve the minutes from the September 13th meeting. Had an opportunity to look them over. Only one who was absent was trustee concerns regarding the minutes written by the clerk? If not, I would entertain a motion to accept the September 13, 2018 Village Board meeting minutes as written by our clerk.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
That was good, Jake.
I'm doing this.
Next, we have a resolution to approve the claims and warrants. They were looked over, I believe, by Jude and Al. It's in tonight, so is there anything, or Carl, you've looked to as well?
I have to.
Anything that you would like to ask about?
Jake, I see on here gutter brooms.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Understanding of replacements, 2 on 9/12, and then 2 on 9/17 for 500 apiece.
Yeah, that's a set, it's 500 for a set. When we did the milling and that, with the road work, you're sweeping up, all that, it's pretty.
More right now, pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's expected.
No.
All right, then one other one, roofing for 8,500. Wind damage there.
That was,
Does the insurance cover that, or?
A piece of it.
yeah,
I think it was about a $3,000 check. So that will go directly against that line. So
I
really, the
suppose.
cost was $5,000.
5,000, maybe.
And we already received that insurance money.
Okay. Okay.
Actually, I believe the copy of the check was attached to the invoice, so you can see that.
Good one.
I would like to bring your attention to page 5 of the abstract. There was an error made in entry of the bill for energy for July for the sewage treatment plant. We used to have Constellation, and when I coded the bill, I put Constellation instead of Monroe County Director of Finance, which is the new company we pay. So that bill will be erased, but a new bill for the exact same amount will be entered. So you'll be approving the amount, but the vendor will change to Monroe County Director of Finance. Apologize for that error.
We have a bill 2017-18 for our Village Band Association Webster. Reason why that's showing up now.
It's always after the season's over,
Yeah.
and their band season is over, so this is the time she turns in her bill.
So is that part of the 2018-19 budget that you passed with the band?
Yes, sir. Mhm.
Anything else? If not, I would entertain a motion to pay the claims and warrants.
I'll make that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay, next we're moving on to budget modifications. You can look at the expenditures and appropriations separately, take a look at where we are. But we move to item number 4. We have 2 sewer fund budget modifications. The first one, and we'll vote on them together, is from line 0408-8130-200, the sewer equipment line of $1,850.07, moved to 0408-8130-406, which is vehicle maintenance repair as a result of a fan issue with the Bobcat and an emergency fuel tank replacement on the W4 vehicle maintenance repair has gone over what was budgeted. So they need to have a modification in that. The second one is from line 0408-8130-200, again sewer equipment for $1,535, moved to line 0408-8130-455, engineering and professional services for for $1,535. That's a result of the additional invoices from Lavella for engineering work related to the STP expenses not budgeted for initially. I believe I can have a motion to make these sewer fund budget modifications.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None, motion carries.
May I
Now,
ask a question?
pardon?
May I ask a question?
You may.
Since we went through the claims and warrants already, it includes the Macedon excavating bill. That is okay to pay now?
That was included in the last one that was approved.
But it was
with
approved
contingency.
with some type of,
Yeah, it should be, as part of the meeting today, was a discussion, they're making great gains on the EBO, the EBO system. The DBE things are all straightened out, and it all relates to this equitable business opportunities program they call the EBO system that the state has. And they have to be able to enter all the information in there, there's a modification of their DBE, which is a disadvantaged business enterprise utilization plan. And once the plan goes in and it's approved at a higher level at the state, any changes to that has to be approved, and it's, once you put it into the program, I guess it's already looking for whatever you put in there, so if something's changed. They actually ended up having to call the vendor that supplied the program to the state because no one else could answer their questions, and got that answer yesterday. We're able to get in and modify it, and we discussed that somewhat today. So looks like they were getting more certified payrolls and getting more of the contractors to update the CBO system. There's the main general contractor, which is Macedon, and any of the subcontractors working for them, they have to load their employees' hours and things in the utilization rates for female and minority on into the programs. Very often, a lot of these, the contractors are, they can, wonderfully skilled craftsmen, and they don't have a computer sitting next to them all day, and they don't utilize them. But this EBO program is not very user-friendly, so trying to get them, it's been an uphill battle, and I know Master has been working hard, and the engineers have been working hard to get that through. So it looks like it's all caught up, and I expect to talk to the engineers in the state again tomorrow. It might be an okay, I'll send out an email once their approval will be okay to release that.
thank you.
Because the previous issue had been taken care of.
Yeah, but then kind of
That-
reemerged because of the computer issues. Now it's been re-resolved.
I would like to put the next three things together. This is resolution authorized mayor and to sign tree easement maintenance agreement on 3 properties on South Avenue. These properties are, first of all, 180 South Avenue. It would be the village of Webster and Carol and Joanne Blanchard. An agreement with the owner James Scott at 184 South Avenue. And the third one is an agreement made between Dennis and Karen Slicker, property located at 190 South Avenue. And what we are looking to do is to, I believe, place trees that are not in the right-of-way. So we have asked for a tree easement maintenance agreement with the property owners, and they have all signed. Correct?
They have not. I've discussed it with 2 of them, and been looking for the third to discuss it with, but not knowing, I wanted to present this to the board before I went and told them they were going to take care of their trees, and then if the board had concerns about it or wished not to do it, I didn't want to be a liar to our residents. So I wanted to get the board's feelings on it first and approval, and then I could take it to them with confidence.
Looking for a resolution. Okay. So you have not, I think there was one.
The property of Joanne and Carol already has 3 trees on it?
There's-
Right away?
There's trees, no, there's trees on the, they live on Clover Drive, corner of Clover and South Ave. Clover Drive, I believe, has 2 that are within the Clover Drive right away that are in their easement. The South Avenue side are all just outside of the easement, or excuse me, they're right away.
Yeah.
So the intent is there to make sure they're right on the edge, and some history is they were told in the past, from what I understand, by the village, that they couldn't cut those trees because they were village trees. They didn't show up on the inventory. So, you know, we saw an opportunity to secure, at least between Clover Drive and Dunning Avenue, that area so we could plant trees and have an area to maintain street trees that won't put them in conflict with infrastructure and things that are already in place there. So, and it's set down, we did a similar thing on West Main Street with some of the trees we planted there. There was a problem with, you know, conflicts there,
Do
so.
you know what they're asking for? What are the trees that they're looking to put in?
There's trees that are existing there. That was another thing I liked about this. There were 7, on that whole stretch, there's 7 trees. So one of the trees we have to look at, I think it's going to need some trimming. The other one we got to have evaluated for the health, but the remaining 5 trees are in seemingly pretty good shape. And the other, you know, where those other trees are, now, like I said, we've secured, it's basically, you go behind our right of way, a 15-foot to the east of our right of way, that whole strip, really between Clover and Dunning, where we'll have the opportunity to keep and maintain street trees now that aren't going to be in conflict with anything else that's out there, so.
What is the right of way on South Avenue? Is it 33 feet on each side? of the
Yeah,
center
it's
line?
typically a 66-foot wide right of way in a state area there, like that. So it's probably 33 feet from the center line when the road went in, which I'm sure has wandered and moved since the road's gone in. But right now, the sidewalks, it's basically just well, it varies, and I look at parcel viewer, actually, you might have it here on some of the maps. They don't show a great description, I guess, exactly what it is, but.
You know what the trees are that we're looking to put into these easements? What are the types of trees that they're asking for?
There's no trees that we're looking at putting in there now. We're looking at the trees that are, they're existing trees that we're.
That we would simply maintain?
Yes, and then as those trees mature or have to get replaced, we would now have the opportunity to replace those trees with village trees. There's pretty small area of tree lawn in between, in that location on South Avenue. So we'd be able to have, like I said, it's a similar thing we did on West Main Street. We would be able to have that area put and maintain trees in there.
So when these property lines were set originally, there was no easement there?
No, there's no, as far as I've been able to find, there's no easement for trees or anything there. And it's, the right of way, it's beyond, but, you know, these, like I said, at least Mrs. Blanchard, talking to her, I know she was told in the past, she said when she purchased the house, that they were all village trees. And she did indicate that she had communication with the village before, that the village told her that those are village trees and you can't trim them, you can't do stuff with them, they're ours. So she called up and said, hey, can we come look at this one tree? And that's how the conversation started. So that's not a village tree. She relayed the information in the past, conversation she had in the past. And I said, well, you know, we can't work on private property, but there's definitely a benefit to having these trees. There's definitely, you know, benefit to having this, you know, not only aesthetically, but, you know, all the other benefits of trees along that area. And if we can secure some room along that corridor to have the trees and maintain the tree-lined streets, I thought it was an opportunity at least to consider.
Street?
Yes.
You were out.
I went out, yeah. I
So what we're
specifically-
looking at here is we're just looking at giving a recommendation that we, if they're interested, agree to move forward, because they have not committed to it yet.
But no one's signed yet. I know two of them are interested, they've expressed interest in it. I haven't talked to Dennis, Karen Sliker, down in the corner there yet. I haven't looked, I went to school with Dennis, so I know him. I haven't looking for him when I drive by, sometimes I'll take down the avenue, that avenue down in home. Sometimes I'll see him out front of the house, and I figure I can stop and talk to him about it when I see him, but like I said, I didn't want to raise any expectations and provide false hope if it wasn't something that the village wanted to do. I didn't want to tell them that they definitely would. I explained to Mrs. Blanchard and Jim Scott there that I would, look into it.
Is that ours, Mr. Scott?
Yep, that's our Jim Scott too.
Well, I don't want to do any of that until they all agree.
Yeah, but
Well, I think that's why
should
it
get
came
the
to
okay.
us, just to see
Yeah.
if it's okay, if we think that that's an okay thing to do, before we pushed any farther with them.
I'm going to make a resolution then to offer.
We'll just table it to the next meeting.
I personally, I have not walked all of them, and I would like to take a look at the, and the trees that are there, and what we're talking about, so. And if you haven't contacted all three of them, then we'll wait until you do, and they make a firm commitment to it as well. It probably is a good idea in that, I know that some of the trees that have been planted by the village, that there is an issue periodically with that. And I certainly know of two of them right now. The elms that were planted on Elm Street, that were planted out of the right-of-way in their properties, and there's also a maple that was planted, and that's out of the right-of-way. But they were planted, the village came and asked them, what would you like? They said, this is what we would like, the village put the tree in, but they're out of the right-of-way. So, I mean,
And that's why I've tried to
it's
see.
not
these
really
issues.
private, it's the village's tree, but yet it's on the private property, so.
Right, and that's why I've tried to seek these easements for people, because it's a blessing and a curse, I guess. There's a ton of benefits from having these trees.
Absolutely.
But also it can become a burden sometimes. So if someone wants to plant a tree in their own yard, that's their decision. That's wonderful, they can do it. But if we plant one on somebody else's property, first of all, we really legally can't do that.
Yeah.
Without, a public benefit, without an easement or something in place that said we could. But if we put it on there, someday, trees have a lifespan like everything else, and someday, there's requirements for maintenance and that, so if we put that burden on somebody, it's nice, I think, to have this sort of agreement where we're giving them the burden of raking the leaves and picking up some sticks now and then, and we take care of the rest that, we all enjoy. If it's something planted along the sidewalk or along the right of way, everybody benefits from that, so.
So I would ask for motion to table this resolution to the next meeting.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So table to the next meeting, you can have the opportunity to find. Discussion next, planning board recommendation. The planning board recommended notice of decision. They gave a positive recommendation to the village board to accept the original letter of credit in the amount of $1,059,471.75 for the site plan infrastructure construction, subject to Mark Van Epps indicating what items in the estimate will be completed in phase 1, 2, and 3. I believe from looking at some emails that have been going around, our attorney, Mr. White, has been in conversation with the attorney for our client, Mr. Van Epps, and I believe that you guys have come to an agreement. However, it went to the bank, I believe today, Melanie and Dylan to talk about it, and I don't believe they've gotten back to anything.
That's right.
Right? So we're still in limbo about what happens with the money moving to cover phase 2 and 3 infrastructure.
She only just got back from Europe.
Anyways, what they have done, you remember that amount of money was about cut in half. A lot of questions about how that happened. And Mr. Van Epps has agreed to go back to the original amount that was agreed to by the planning board originally. And so I believe all we're waiting for is completion of how that money not spent for phase 1 will be carried over to cover phase 2 and phase 3. So if, I just make you aware of that, it will be coming to us, I imagine, for the next board meeting. So we'll do that. Okay. It's in lieu of an actual letter of credit, so it's a little bit different, if you've been following this at all. But it will be fairly ironclad. I think Mr. Wade had anything to do with it.
I still haven't received a breakdown as to how much of the $1,059,000 is allocated to the improvements in phase 1, 2, and 3. So,
What is the infrastructure?
It's
Yeah, like sewer lines and all that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
it's the road type.
Yeah,
The road.
so,
Just wanted to define infrastructure.
yeah, the original letter of credit called out not just water, sewer, sanitary and storm, that's typical infrastructure. Roadways would be considered infrastructure, things like that. But it also delineated plantings, stormwater pollution prevention plans, and the implementation of all those things. And the difficulty with what was originally presented from the bank was they said, okay, we want all of that in phase 1. And the problem with that is, though, if anybody has done any kind of construction work on a large-scale project, and we ran into this before, is that that would require all the streetlights, all the sidewalks, all the asphalt, all the driveways, everything in during construction of phase 1, without any buildings being built in phase 2 or phase 3, which means it's a waste of money because they're destroying it all, in between the phases, and they'll just have to spend more money replacing sidewalks and asphalt and perhaps, the electric getting dug up from the street lines and so on. So the reason why, Don and I were in emails, and I said, look, from a practical standpoint, it doesn't make sense. And so that's why the planning board in the resolution put the contingency in there that it would be wise if they could break down, how much asphalt's going to be in phase 1 and in phase 2 and phase 3, how much sidewalk or concrete, right, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. That way, although they're doing everything from reading the language of it, it seems like they're doing everything they can to come as close to a letter of credit without being a letter of credit. But I guess the whole point is to provide guarantees. that in the long run, if they can come up with language, and I'll let Don speak to that, but if they can come up with language that gives us guarantees that if, heaven forbid, something happened, that at least the infrastructure that I described could go in, and the funds would be available to make sure that that's done.
Essentially, we're asking the bank to escrow the money for phases 2 and 3, for whatever infrastructure is going to be required in phases 2 and 3. And I don't know if they're going to agree to that or not.
Have to be involved.
That doesn't seem like much to me, but.
So that's what we're waiting on. And once they make that decision, then we can
Okay.
to accept or not.
All right.
I would think that we're going to hear very soon, if the bank was discussing about it today. So he would like to cut in as quickly as possible, but that's up to you. Okay. Don, do you have anything beyond that?
No, I do not.
Code enforcement, Will,
All set.
and the report,
No, we're good.
we're good?
Yep.
Running smooth?
I mean, I've done enough talking. On a positive note, I can't remember if I mentioned this last time or not, but the pickled paintbrush. Did we talk about that last time?
You did.
Okay, and JoJo's, so
Coming
I'm
in.
done.
Timetable on JoJo's.
I'm out.
What's the timetable?
They, right now, it's in the architect's hands. I walked in the building because they had already done a little bit of demolition, not bad, and showed me what they had done. They actually, where the number one Chinese restaurant was.
You come 10 minutes.
What's that?
You come 10 minutes.
Yeah. They were
Slow
funny.
down in there, only it used to be 5.
All right, anyway, so they actually opened up
They did,
to that side, so it's all gonna be one big
yeah.
area.
That's going to be the pizza.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, they're gonna have the wood-fired pizza and stuff. And it's good forward to that.
But they give you like, yeah, we're shooting for November 1st, do they give you?
No, because they've got a lot of work to do
Okay.
on the inside of there, changing things. Plus, when they expanded it, now they have to expand the sprinkler system over to the other side as well, and so, although, I will say on a positive note, I've had really good communication and interaction with the builders. They do an excellent job, from my opinion, if that matters. And every time I've asked them to do something, they've always been very good about following up and doing that.
I see we had a hogweed scare.
Oh, yes. So what I did in that particular situation was, so some weeds were growing over at 87 Kircher Park, where the house was demolished. And they had the little white flowers growing up, that hogweed, if you look at pictures of hogweed, they have these like little cluster of white flowers. And so the neighbor was concerned, so I took a picture of it, and I sent it to Cornell Cooperative Extension, and they wrote back and said, that's Queen Anne's lace.
Yeah, right.
And I said, well, that's good. Poor Queen Anne has a weed named after her, but positive note is, no, it's not right. But what they did say, which was interesting, was that they're both from the carrot family, so that's why they look at it. But don't eat the hogweed.
Okay? DPW?
I had coffee today, so I'll apologize in advance.
Speak faster.
Jake, what are you gonna do?
No, North Avenue Connector, I think we discussed a lot of updates on that. They're continuing to make progress. They're to the point now with the pavilion and the gateway sign. They're doing the cobblestones, the granite cobblestones that are going on there. It is, I begun to really appreciate why there's not any cobblestone buildings being built today. It is a slow, very slow process, and you can watch the guys. Yeah, I've gone down, and they can do 1 or 2 rows maybe,
Yeah, that's
but
what
they're
they do.
using an extruded joint line on it too, instead of, they call it an outie instead of an innie, I guess. And where that joint line is, they'll strike the line, and then you can just sit there and watch it kind of go like that. And then they gotta let it dry and set up a little bit more, and then they kind of restrike it and bring it back, and they're constantly tweaking it with trowels and tools, trying to get that. So, I mean, there's some natural wandering in it, but you're trying not to make everything just laying down like it's falling off the ledge.
So
So
it's one row at a time, actually.
yeah, and it's definitely an art. The one gentleman that's down there working on it, when I stopped one time, I learned that his family's been doing stonework for about 4 generations. His grandfather, he said, spent 25 or 30 years at Holy Sepulchre doing the stone walls there, you know, tearing those down and replacing sections of about 20 or 30 feet at a time and redoing all that. He lives in a cobblestone house, so he's very well acquainted with it. So we definitely have the right guy for the job down
Oh,
there.
my goodness,
But
yes. But it's so interesting,
I know, I
just,
really, I looked
Yeah.
at that, myself, really.
We are doing brush, and I had this queued up. After tonight, I'm gonna come in and talk about a PO for a computer for the meetings. I had this queued up to show everybody on our website where you can find information about brush. We have brush next week is another brush pickup day. We have information on the website explaining what can go in and what can't go in. And just real briefly, have them out on Sunday night, because we'll try to make one trip around the village. So when you see the brush machine or the brush chipper going by, it's too late. Try to get it out Sunday night so we can be pretty efficient in providing that service. Leave brush as long as you can. Put the butt ends or the cut end towards the street. That makes it a lot easier, because that's what has to go in the machine first. A lot of people think you're doing us a favor by cutting them up short, but if you leave them long, that's safer for everybody doing it. No lumber can go in there. And most importantly, the thing that we get, the issue that we have, I guess, is vines, real thorny stuff, vines, and roots. If you pull out shrubs, pull out trees, or pull out that, they're big, huge knives spinning on a drum. We can't introduce roots and rocks and dirt into that. And thorns, you know, we don't want to injure people, but the vines just get wrapped around the end of the drum. They don't chop, they don't do it, but the roots, the rocks and stuff, we just destroy the knives and make it pretty dangerous. So those will not go in, those we drive by, and we typically try to provide a letter. And I think that's it for me.
my goodness.
Sure.
The sewer is flowing.
Going?
It is going, and one of the things I wanted to mention on sewer too, I thought about it today. We had some calls earlier this week, individuals residents having an issue with the sewer at their house, and we went out and investigated. Our sewer was running fine. The laterals are the residents' responsibility, but I want everybody to keep in mind that we do have a lateral camera. And one of the services we provide to residents is to camera the laterals. So there's, you know, we call ahead on that. We'll try to get something scheduled. Obviously, if you're having a sewer issue, we don't make you schedule it a week later. You know, we get there as quick as we can. We'd like to schedule it a day ahead, but we certainly try to work around people's schedules and their emergencies. We can camera a sewer line. Like I said, there's some information about what we can and can't do. It doesn't see underwater, so you have to let it drain slow. If it's running slow or if it's plugged, you have to get it cleared first. But a lot of plumbing companies will offer to camera the line, but there's a fee to that. That's something that we can provide. And it'll help identify right where an issue is and confirm maybe with a sewer company or an excavation or plumbing company is telling you, you know, if you had to replace this section of pipe, a lot of times it provides peace of mind that, yep, you're working with the right company or working with the right person, because here's what they told you, and it shows you here's what's happening. So it's always scary when you're facing some of those costly home improvements, so, especially when you can't see it.
And on top of that, just real quick, if somebody finds themselves in a situation where they're on a fixed income, limited income, say Social Security or something like that, the Monroe County Home Improvement Grant Program will help in a situation like that as well. We've done that before in the past. That was really great, quick turnaround.
Last couple of years, several people have taken advantage of that.
Is that information available to citizens?
It is. We have the applications at the village, plus we have a link on our website.
Okay.
Our next meeting is a little different than what was announced in the paper. It is October 2nd, not October 3rd. You come on the 3rd, on Wednesday you will miss midweek service and all that stuff. So anyways, be here on Tuesday next week. We have a village board meeting then on the 11th and the 25th, and we have another workshop on the 30th of October, full month of meetings. The one next week on Tuesday, we will probably have a discussion briefly about the joint sewer report. There is a question I can bring up to you all in terms of time, and you all have had a copy of that, I believe, sent to you to look over, and I will keep you up to date with all of the things that I'm getting. Also, Xerox, you are probably aware of the fact that they are interested in putting together 2 viable parcels of land, and they cannot do that with the town-village border going through 3 buildings. So they've asked for resolution to that, and so we're in the process of thinking about how that will resolve, and maybe that's something that we should discuss as well. So we will see you all maybe on Tuesday at our next workshop. So if I can have if nothing else, is there anything else anybody would like to bring up? If not, then I would ask for a motion to adjourn. I believe that it is 8:33.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Done. Motion carried.
No problem.